Let's do that now. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to start with one of the articles I gave the MSCIS students. So the next one will be for ICT. So we'll go through.
I have a question, Doctor. Pardon me for taking you back behind.
It's okay.
Now, I was doing some digging into what we covered last time.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to this thing called literature review.
Yes.
I'm not going to say I was doing research because I may be using the wrong words here. Let me just use plain English as such. So they say that when you have some questions, they actually gave an example of a human resource manager who is looking into cultural diversity training. So they said that you're the human resource manager, you're doing some, you're supposed to get some information on cultural diversity training. So they are trying to relate it to this thing called literature review. And they said that maybe during that process of looking into that topic, you're going to come up with some questions that will need answers. So the answers, luckily enough, we're having the assumption that there is another person, or maybe, let me put it this way, the research community, the way you've been putting it, have already found out those answers.
Yes.
Then for you, your task, because they said the solutions are the ones who are referring to as the literature. And then for you, your task is to come and find those answers, which are referring to as the literature review.
Yes.
Then after getting those answers, that's when maybe you can come and make an important decision. And I was trying to connect it with what you told us last time. And then we agreed that you need to, of course, begin by looking at the ICT journals and what has already been published. Then you go and look at what research has already been done. So when I was connecting it, I think this is the point whereby we say that research is already there. Okay, like answers are already there. Yes. Your task is to find them and then maybe find the gaps in that research.
Yes.
So as I was coming to a conclusion, because I also got also some ways of how we can come up with a structure of my literature review. Does this thing mean that our literature review is entirely going to be concentrated around what other people did, what other people researched, or what other people found out, the research community? Because I was told that as you're making your literature review, step number one, you will have to strip down the summaries of what those other people did. And in the process of stripping down the summaries, they said you separate the citations themselves, and then also the paragraphs containing the information from the citations. Then they said, step number two, you reorder the paragraphs very well. Of course, after getting them here from step number one, come up with some potential arguments. You come up with some themes. They gave examples and they say there is this thing called cause effect, series of advances, ancient to modern, problem solution, myths / realities, effective, ineffective. Those are some of the answers. I think I was trying to relate it to what we were having last time. And they said step number three, you combine the paragraphs if it is necessary, according to step number two, which we refer to as the potential arguments. Then step number four, they said, add topic sentencing and transitions. And I put the transitions as maybe trying to move from maybe paragraph one to paragraph two, how you can put it together. And then lastly, they said step number five, add an introduction and a conclusion. And then there was another word that came up, thesis.
Thesis, eh?
Yes.
Okay. When they said thesis, what were they in? It was in relation to what specifically?
They say the thesis will bring out the summary of major points discussed by the sources.
Okay.
the sources that we got the other side behind there.
Okay. Now,
And,
that
yes.
was a I think what you are looking at is what is referred to as systematic literature review. It is also another data collection method, specifically if you're looking at literature review as one of your main sources. But, however, in relation to what you're asking, what you're referring to, in terms of identification of identification of a research problem. Yeah, identification of a research problem. And specifically, you started with an example of somebody looking for something in terms of HR.
Yes.
Yeah. So we when they tell you that, you're beginning with something that is of interest to you. Something that is of interest to you, a particular thing that is of interest to you. When we talked last week, we saw a number of people came up with areas of interest. For example, somebody talked about fintech. I remember Eddie talked something about agriculture and
barcode scanners.
Yeah, barcode scanners. All those are areas of interest. I remember somebody during the week called me and she said her interests, let me try to, my mind has so many things running through it, but I think her interest was about SMEs and ICT, and to see if there's an actual improvement, if there's efficiency or improvement or rather a positive improvement in efficiency, especially in relation to SMEs and ICT. So all those are areas of interest. Now, the first and foremost important thing is, one, you've picked your area of interest. Two, you've narrowed it down to something very, very specific. Take an example. When I talked to the person who was interested in SMEs and ICT, and I told her, okay, let's try and narrow it down. Maybe start by looking at, since this is very early, start by looking at enterprise architecture and SMEs. If there's any literature done to see if there's alignment of business of ICT to business processes or business objectives. Why, if we're going to talk about ICT making an impact, then we must know that ICT is actually aligned to an organization's business processes. And therefore, you want the person to start reading on enterprise architecture, because that's what enterprise architecture does, basically aligns to. So I told her to start by reading in that area, in literature regarding that particular part. Now, without getting so much into systematic literature review, what I would advise is, if you want to find out what is new, if you've narrowed your research down, get the latest information regarding your area of interest, the latest information, the latest publication regarding your area of interest. The latest publications regarding your area of interest should point out research that is new or areas that have not been touched. That is one. So that is one area I would advise. Two, also look at context. That's the other area where I would say to try and so that you don't go too global and don't get lost in finding. To look at area in terms of context. When we speak specifically about ICT, things are usually quite new for the developing world in comparison to the developed world. Let me give an example for my colleagues in ICT. you'll hear a lot of things about maybe development of frameworks for this, for that, for the other. Do we have somebody here in healthcare who's in the field of healthcare? No? Okay.
Yes, doctor, we are there. We are very many.
Yeah. So specifically in the field of healthcare and ICT, I just decided while I was thinking about what to discuss with you, I just decided to do a quick search on, I think it was interoperability in public healthcare. And I found quite a bit of literature. I think I even found a framework which was done for Greece. In ICT, what's popular, the artifact that is popular to construct is a framework. And I found a framework for Greece to support interoperability. What that basically means is when we're talking about ICT governance, we have sectors, we have organizations with silo systems, but they're not, you can't seamlessly transfer information or communicate information between systems because they were created as instances separate from others. So the key thing that is now being talked about is interoperability. So that was done for Greece. So imagine there was an ICT student who wants to do the same for Uganda, especially in healthcare. And this person says, okay, I can build a framework specifically for Uganda, or I can go and get the framework for Greece. I implement it here in Uganda, and then I see where I can change it to suit the context of Uganda. Okay, because for sure this is a new field. Yeah, this is a new field. So, and this was, I think it was quite new research. If I remember the article that I saw, it was one of those recent times. So, in other words, Kenneth, you look at one, that the state-of-the-art literature that has been published. State-of-the-art means what is the newest research that has been published on the area of interest that I have. Latest area of interest, as long as I know that I've narrowed it down. That's one. Two, in terms of context. Yeah, look at research in terms of context. Most research, published research, is for the developed world, but not for the developing world like Uganda. So I would look at the newness, put the newness in quotes, the newness of the new knowledge I'm bringing forward would be bringing something in terms of it's new in terms of the context, to make things simpler. Yeah, to make things a lot more simpler in terms of literature review.
Now, let me ask one more question, Doctor.
Yes, Kenneth.
When I'm going to be looking at the literature that is the latest, like you've put it, and also when I'm putting into consideration the factor of context, is that where I should start from when I'm drafting my literature review? Because like we said earlier, we are looking at what the research community has already done first, before I can come and try to plug in the gaps, and maybe like you put it, try to see how I can adjust it to meet our needs in Uganda here.
Yeah, I would say to find the problem, your research problem, I would say start with the latest research. Now, for writing itself, Kenneth, I would advise, first of all, understand the nature of your problem. First of all, understand the nature of your problem, because the nature of your problem will determine the research approach you're going to take. The research approach you're going to take will determine the research design that you're going to have. Now, all of this will dictate your chapter 2. I wouldn't want to say it, because many people, when they think about literature review, they immediately think of chapter 2. But remember, when we're talking about literature review right now, we were talking about all the reading that you will need to do, to back up your arguments. So that's one. So it will also dictate what I don't want us to mistake, Kenneth, is that when we say literature review, normally we're referring to chapter 2. And you will find different people will write different things depending on your research design. Yeah, depending on your research design. So Kenneth, I wouldn't want to box you in what somebody else said. You might find your chapter 2 will be written completely different from what you are reading. Those instructions you gave will be completely different. I'll give an example. Somebody who is taking a predominantly quantitative research, their chapter 2 will be guided by their objectives. Okay? Yes. Whereas a person who their research leans more to the qualitative side, their chapter 2 will be guided most likely by their first research objective. Most likely by their first research objective. I'll give you an example. For me, my first research objective dictated my second chapter. My second research objective dictated my third chapter. My third research objective dictated my fourth chapter. So basically, I answered all my research objectives using my chapters. Now, you see, what you read did not influence what I was writing. So the research, everything, Kenneth, starts from your research problem, the nature of your research problem. Everything starts from there. If it's going to lean towards qualitative, it's going to lean towards quantitative. If it's going to take a mixed method approach. Then if it's going to do that, then your research design is dictated upon.
I get. So yeah. In other words, it is not written on stone.
Exactly.
You have to follow these steps here.
Exactly. That's also what I was also trying to tell Eddie, to avoid boxing yourself with things like your background should have history, concept, and things like that. Avoid that. Everything really starts with the nature of your problem.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
You're welcome. So let us go through literature to see how we can identify a research problem. So I've tried to, there are some articles, for example, if I looked at the Greek, the paper which was designing a framework for Greece, for them it was merely about a question of the need for interoperability, and they didn't even bother to point out literature about whether there was a framework that had been built before. Most likely because there was none. This is the issue of ICT governance is quite new, and therefore also the research. But let's go through this paper, which is entitled Trying to Improve Communication and Collaboration with Information Technology, an action research project which failed. And this is an old research, 1999. So if we just read through the abstract, we can understand something about what this research is about. It says, discusses the use of information technology to facilitate communication and collaboration. In this action research project, a groupware product called Lotus Notes, was implemented to facilitate communication and collaboration amongst the senior management team. So a groupware product would be, let's say, WhatsApp, WhatsApp will allow one-to-one and also allows group communication. So any application that allows group communication would be in this category. But this is an old application, Lotus Notes. So it was implemented with the objective of enabling or facilitating communication and collaboration among senior management team. Now, I already gave an example that for myself, I'm part of a board of directors for a local tea factory here, and we use WhatsApp. to facilitate communication. We also use email, but also we use WhatsApp. Then they say, although there was a real need for change and the project received strong support from senior management, in others, they're saying in the case study itself, there was a real need to improve communication and the project received support. This project, however, failed. And they suggest that the project failed because of institutional forces which inhibited dramatic changes. Now, is this a research problem? No. Here they are talking about the case study itself, where the instance was implemented. But this is not the research problem. So we start with the introduction. We start with the introduction where they talk about the use of information technology to facilitate communication has become an important theme in information system research. So here they're just talking about the significance of using information technologies. Then there's emerging technologies. Of course, this is 1999. We have new technologies now. Emerging technologies such as groupware products and the internet offer the potential. So it's basically that's the motivation. Until recently, most of the previous research in the area, now this is where when we say most of the previous research in the area of groupware has used laboratory experiments in artificial situations. Yeah, they say most of the previous research. As a general rule, most of this research has suggested that positive effects can be derived from the use of groupware. Work is starting to emerge, however, which suggests that there may be significant counter forces which exist to maintain the status quo in organizations. They say work is starting to emerge. In other words, they're saying there's a suggestion that there are significant forces, yeah, which may exist. So now, these people are saying previous research has mostly pointed to research being done in laboratories. But there are suggestions that there may be significant counter forces which may exist that do not want changes to happen. Then there's many IS researchers have pointed out that the broader social and organizational context within which information technology is implemented has a profound influence on the way in which IT is used. So there's a suggestion, but there has not been an actual proof that whereas in laboratories you implement this application, it works, but there may be forces within the live context that will positively or negatively influence. So they say the action research project discussed in this paper was motivated by the desire to understand the full relationship between the introduction of groupware, changes and work habits in the organizational structure of an organization. That was the research object, that was the research motivation. That, in other words, or rather, this is the research problem. Okay? To understand fully the relationship, to understand more fully the relationship between the introduction of the application and the work habits and the organizational structure of an organization. That is the research problem that they needed to answer. What is the relationship? It isn't, the research problem is not that this group of senior management really needed to communicate better. That is not the research problem. That is an organizational problem. Okay? That is an organizational problem, but it's not a research problem. But you see how they were discussing. They were saying most of the research that has been done has been laboratory, experimental, lab-based. But there was suggestions. There were suggestions. There were some emerging suggestions. Yeah, work is starting to emerge, however, which suggests that there may be significant counter forces that exist. And there's many IS researchers, many have pointed out that the broader social and organizational context within which information technology is implemented has profound influence. And they go ahead and quote those people, meaning they're trying to say, these people are saying there is a gap. These people, there is a gap which needs to be understood. And this is the gap that they are pointing out. And that is the actual motivation of their research. It isn't that this particular organization where they implemented that that the senior management needed to communicate. No, it is that they needed to understand fully the relationship between implementing an application and the work habits of an organization. That is the research problem that needs to be answered. So far, do you understand what I'm putting forward or no?
It is clear, Doctor.
Okay.
Yes, it's clear. It's
Is it clear for everyone?
Yes, it's clear, Doctor.
Okay. So we understand there was an existing organizational problem. Take an example. If you came here to our very tiny small tea estate, we will tell you that we have a problem of record keeping. Yeah, for sure. I will tell you sometimes keeping track. Keeping track of this tea estate or keeping track of the other tea estate. For me now, as someone who's in management, I'm running my family's tea estate. I'm also running my late uncle's tea estate, and then also my niece's tea estate. I get money, and this tea estate has a shortfall. This one has a shortfall. There must be a cover. There must be should I say I must bring in some finances somewhere to cover up. But last month, did I get money here? Doing that record keeping. Now, somebody who is doing research cannot say that the research problem is that we are using manual systems. You can't say that because there are other places which are using manual systems and they're working fine. And the person cannot say, I'm going to build a system and this is going to solve, this is the solution to the research problem. No, those systems are already there. It's just that I'm not using them. But you coming to build for me a system is not the research, cannot be, it is not the research problem. Okay, it's not the research problem. It is an organizational problem. Maybe what you can start by saying is that maybe many family-run or SMEs are adopting, but maybe they don't. What has not been determined is if they're actually effective. And then you say, I'm going to implement and evaluate and determine whether this works or not. So this is the significant thing I want to point out about a research problem. This is the research problem, okay? This is the research problem. You can see clearly the authors here state that here in the abstract where they say, although there was real need for change and the project received strong support from senior management on the basis that it would enable radical changes in coordination within the work group, these radical changes did not occur. So here they are talking about the organizational problem, but not the research problem. This is the organizational problem, but it's not the research problem. The research problem, we see it in these few paragraphs. We see this paragraph up to here. This is where we see the research problem actually being brought out. Okay, so you see here, the authors are referring to what the research community is saying, not what the case study is saying. Okay, so far do we understand?
It's clear, Doctor.
Okay, so I hope it's clear with everyone.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, Doctor, maybe a simple inquiry.
Yes, please.
From the beginning, you've been mentioning that at our level, we did not implement. We probably look at what is existing and then try to understand probably the operations of what is existing.
Okay.
My question is,
Mm.
what then is the essence of the research if there's no need for implementation? Or
Okay.
probably is there maybe any study that is supposed to come up to implement such kind of the results of such kind of researches?
Okay, now let me state that the person who actually made that statement was not me, it was Eddie. It was Eddie who said it.
Okay.
That is one thing I want to make clear. Two, I think the department itself will have a workshop where they will state what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. I'll give you an example. I think I remember in one workshops, one of the heads of department said that there are some people who may not necessarily be interested in research, but more in terms of a project. And for some, that is acceptable. I'm not 100% sure of what is acceptable for UMU, but I would say I would reserve that to the department to state clearly. Now, for me as a researcher, what would I encourage you? For me as a researcher, what would I encourage you? One, I would encourage you, whether you want to implement an application, a system, whatever it is, go beyond the system. Look at, for example, what these people did in this particular paper that you see of the Lotus Notes, where they implemented the groupware. They were not interested in Lotus. What they were interested in is seeing the relationship between the implementation and the organization. That's what they were interested in. The application itself, it has its purpose, yes, and the organization had a need, but what they were reporting back was that relationship, those forces that affect or that influence an instance that has been implemented within an organization.